Welcome to The Fountain with Ellie Thomas. The fountain is an image that I use in my work often to speak of our multidimensionality, to connect with the life, the living water flowing within us through mind, body, spirit, heart, and all. This show is a place where we explore it all, where we tap into wisdom that has surfaced through pain and joy and the fullness of our journeys. This podcast is a place to come and remember, to sink back into the living water that flows within you and to be guided back to your fountain, your fullness, your wholeness, and how to be with that as we navigate living as divine humans in this wild, wild world and this wild, wild journey. I'm so glad you're here. Let's dive in together and be refreshed and consoled by the water that wants to flow through. Welcome to the fountain. How are you today? How are you finding yourself as you are arriving into this space that I believe that everybody that listens helps co-create with me? Thank you for being here and part of this creation. I am exiting a really beautiful weekend where I had one of the honors of my lifetime to officiate my little sister's wedding. And all of last week was a lot of wedding preparations and getting the ceremony and also just all of the pieces of heart and soul and words and details out and put together. And family coming into town. And it was truly a really, really beautiful weekend. And I was so honored to be a part of it in the way I was, and so happy for my sister and her husband. That is so wild to say. And as I returned from the weekend, my husband and I both felt tired, and I think everybody probably did, that like happy, content, tired, but now I need a long nap. And so this week, as I've been returning and transitioning back into other focuses and other things, much of which has included the new things that are bubbling and brewing and coming up in Ellie Flow land, including this beautiful membership container I've been working on for a while that is so close to having the doors open and welcoming you in, and all sorts of things. I've also been just restoring my energy and needing to do my own sacred tending around missing my mom and missing her in this pivotal time for my sister. And we did such a beautiful job creating a ceremony that honored her and incorporated her. And she's such an essential part of us and also of the story of my sister and her husband getting to know each other. And so that was really incredible. And also there's immense pain there too. So it's been a full week and it's been going by quickly. And one thing that I've noticed coming up this week for me is a lot of mental resistance. And when working with resistance, one thing that's really incredible is that it also gives us this invitation, this opening to sink into and play with acceptance. And for many, many episodes of the podcast, especially at the beginning, I spoke a lot about embodied acceptance. And I have yet to do a full episode on it. But today we're going to dive into this dance between resistance and acceptance. I think that this is so prevalent and relevant for spring, and so it goes really well with just the spring energies that I've been talking about. And I will say that I feel like it goes with spring really well because we are living in that tension, as I talked about. If you haven't listened to the Spring Energetics episode, you might want to go back and listen to that one. But we're living in this tension of what we can feel is here and coming in the non-physical, like in the energetic space. It's already anchored in, and yet we're not necessarily seeing it outside of ourselves yet in the physical. And so we can be looking for things beyond ourselves to confirm that it's coming, and the truth is that they're not there yet. It can create this sense of disillusionment or of disappointment or of questioning of ourselves or of believing that we need to be different or be doing things different or find a different way to do things in order to bring things forth. When truthfully, usually we just need to come into connection and acceptance with the moment and alignment with the energy that is here and really turn towards the beauty and the presence of what is here now for us to be in enjoyment of, and that allows what's coming to continue to unfold, and that gives us the energy. And when we're in resistance, it's kind of like somebody's squeezing our fountain pipe. Like the water is trying to get through, but it has to work really hard to create flow, and therefore we feel stuck or we feel tired. It just feels like there's a lot of force that needs to happen to make things move, which is kind of like the opposite of flow. And so it's like having this really constricted block of some kind. Like I don't see it quite as the same as like a block of emotion or energy that needs to be processed that isn't allowing water to flow. I see it almost more as like the squeezing where there might be a little bit trickling through, but we really aren't able to tap into the true vitality of the flow and what's coming through. So I'm going to get a little bit more specific today and share with you some of the examples that I was noticing with myself. And I think that that will help you kind of tune into resistance. I also want to say resistance is very heady in my experience. We can also be experiencing it in our bodies, especially if we somatically have like trauma or emotion stored. And that's where the deep emotional work that I always talk about comes up. And also, I think it's helpful to just see, like, notice the thoughts of resistance and what their kind of frequency is. And in my experience, it's very mental. It's like it has a heaviness and a darkness and like a squinty-eyedness to it that is similar but in the head as maybe sometimes when you're feeling grief in your body. Like grief has a heaviness, but it's a much lower heaviness in the body, I find. And so resistance is kind of like this cloudiness, this heaviness, this squinted eyes, this analytical, not in a positive way, loop that we can get into. And I find a lot of the time that when we're in resistance, we're actually not able to be present here now. Our energy isn't fully with us. We can consciously become aware of the sensation, and I want to invite you to tune into what is a sensation in your physical and energetic space when resistance is present. And you might not even know what resistance is or looks like yet. For you. And that is okay. I want to say that resistance and working with it is a journey that I believe that all humans go on for all of time, as long as we are alive. And resistance does this dance with acceptance and surrender. And as we become more evolved and more conscious and more connected, resistance comes in more subtle ways, and we attune to it and attend to it and attend to it. I like that. Sooner and faster than we did in earlier stages of our, personal, spiritual, conscious development. And so, do I believe that monks still have resistance? Yes, on a much lesser scale in a much more subtle way, but I don't know that it's something that humans fully ever graduate out of it, because it is part of being human. It is part of living in density. It is part of being a person that naturally desires more and looks towards more and wants to grow into something beyond what we have here in this exact moment in our physical space. And resistance can be tricky because it can look like really beautiful things that we desire for our lives. It can look like clarity, but maybe it is clarity, but it brings with it a frequency and energy that's a lot heavier and not as inviting and flow inviting as clarity does. So let me get more granular with you to give you some examples, and you can see how this maybe arises for you. You can just contemplate it. Maybe something I say will be right on for you. Or maybe you'll need to spend some time with yourself exploring what is the way that resistance shows up for you and how drastic or subtle is it? How do you notice it when it's there? I usually notice it in me when I don't feel in flow. And when I don't feel in flow, I can say, okay, there's some resistance here. Like, what is that? So this morning, something that I was really noticing was moving around in my mind was this thought of wishing that I wasn't tired, wishing that I had more energy today, wishing that something that I'm going through in one of my relationships was resolved and that the other person had found a different way of doing things, wishing that a groin injury, a pulled adductor muscle that I have, was fully healed again so that I can go back to yoga. I was basically combating everything that is present in my life right now with desire for it not to be that way. This is pretty typical with resistance, and this is why it's called resistance. Imagine for a moment just everything in your life that is happening, whether you like it or not. Just very neutrally imagine it existing there. And then allow yourself to attune to the ways where your mind comes up against those things and pushes against them with desires or beliefs that go in the opposite direction. This inherently inhibits the ability for things in our life to flow because we are creating opposition through resistance. Like, that is what resistance is. Like, we're getting in the way of the momentum, right? We're not allowing the fluidity of what's here to be lived and to continue to evolve. And so we end up getting in our own way just by resisting things, because if we weren't in our own way, things would continue to evolve. If we weren't creating resistance, things would continue to move forward, and we would be on the ride and able to enjoy and be in awe, delight, awareness, sadness, happiness in interaction with it. But instead of being in interaction with it, I was just coming up with, I don't want this to be this way, and creating these pretty large mental blocks that inhibit flow. Now, I used to live my life in this space like 7 years ago. Holy moly, so much has shifted for me around this. And so this is what I was saying earlier, that our journeys with resistance changes over time. And as we become more attuned to it, more aware with it, and more aware of how we're working with it ourselves, we're helping to create it, where it's coming from within us, as we deepen that experience, it becomes really noticeable. And so yesterday I was not feeling resistance, but some things happened last night and in the morning that had me just in a tired, grumpy state. And from that state, these thought forms were born. And I quickly, within an hour of it circulating, noticed it and was able to work with it. Now, this is where the embodied acceptance part comes in. Because when we are working with ourselves in resistance. And that resistance, for me, there was some anger present today that I needed to be with. There was some fear. There was some just plain old tiredness that needed to be witnessed within me. And a lot of skill and a lot of ability and trust with myself that has been cultivated came into play so that I could really allow this resistance energy to soften quickly and to not be hanging out for a long time. Now, again, do I believe that resistance will always be part of our lives as humans? I do personally believe that. I just think that we get to be masters at noticing it, working with it, releasing it, coming back into acceptance, and through that flow. So let's talk about what that process is like. And it's a lot easier for me to give it words as I'm kind of guiding you through this process and experience, because while there are steps to it, it also carries an energy with it. Like if we were to combat resistance with the same type of energy that resistance exists in, we would just be creating more resistance. Let me say that again in different words. Say you're feeling resistance, crunchy. I like to call resistance energy crunchy. And you're just noticing all the places where you are pushing against everything that is currently in your life instead of going with it and leaning in and allowing it to flow and unravel and unwind how it is. If we were to say, oh, I'm noticing all this resistance that I'm creating. No, I don't want to be in resistance. Can you feel how that kind of aggressive energy just pushes up against resistance and we're just creating more resistance? Yes, I'm saying resistance a lot. This is getting tongue-tied, but it's important. It's important to recognize that we need to be able to connect with ourselves and to, when we are ready, shift into the appropriate energy to actually allow resistance to move and to dissolve, and for the energies that are there to work through us. Usually underneath resistance, there are other things. There are, as I said, emotions that aren't coming to the surface or that don't feel safe to be felt, or that you maybe don't know how to express or where to place them. I find this a lot with anger. Anger can be part of resistance a lot. And I also find, and I will have an anger episode on its own soon because it's come up so much recently, especially as I've been leading grief flows in person. And anger is something that I work very intimately with, and it's a huge part of my personal journey. And I have observed that women have not had space to healthily engage their anger and release it. It has become something that we have repressed because it has not been safe in our society. Nobody taught us how to do this. Nobody gave us space for this and to actually sit with all of it, like the full arc of anger, not just to get to the heat of it and to enter into action from that place, but to literally sit with the entire arc of it and then to see what's underneath it, if there is something underneath it. And therefore, because we haven't had that space and haven't been taught and haven't had the safety to do this in our society, in our homes, ever, we have created these loops where we loop our anger back at ourselves. And so when anger is underneath resistance, when it is fueling resistance, if we don't know how to step out and connect with ourselves in a different way and to recognize what's happening from a different place, we enter into a loop of creating more resistance by serving that anger right back at ourselves and getting stuck kind of in an anger loop, which just keeps us in the resistance loop. This is very powerful and very nuanced and sometimes subtle, sometimes not. Everything in the energetic realm is subtle, but this is not subtle sometimes. Maybe you can immediately pinpoint a moment where you have looped your anger back at yourself and stayed in that kind of hardened place of resistance with something in your life. And maybe it's just so subtle, like it's so natural that you need to just give it some space to start to show you, oh yeah, there's anger here. I can feel it arising in my system, and it's triggering this loop that instead of knowing where to go and how to be expressed, because that feels like the scariest thing in the world to let happen, my system is a master at relooping it back at myself, at blaming myself, at being mad at myself, at harboring everything, all of the fire that's in that anger, and just blowing it back in my face. So there is skill needed to work with resistance in order to arrive to embodied acceptance. Some people just say, just don't think about it anymore and change the topic. Sometimes I have done that, and sometimes it has worked. That's cool if it works for you. I personally find so much richness in knowing how to work with myself. And I think every time that I work with a client around this, there's just so much gold. It's so rich and yummy that once you know how to do it, and once you have experience and trust with yourself, and when I say know how to do it, it's not like, this perfect way. But once you have this experience and trust with, wait, I can engage this from a different place and actually let it take me on a journey and allow for release, the beauty that's alive in that and the openings that come from that are, I don't want to say addicting, but you don't want to miss out on that. And so this bypassing of like, oh, just don't think about it, go focus on something else. While it does work sometimes, and sometimes it is a tool that really can help us shift our energy, I find that the more we know how to engage ourselves in these moments, the more liberation that comes. And I don't know if I've said this before, but I've sent it in newsletters recently. The tagline for all of Ellie Flowland work is sacred tending, liberated expression. And again, here we are in a moment of sacred tending, of allowing ourselves to step into the sacred tender of ourselves, to receive from the divine sacred tending that already exists, and to be in cooperation with that as we work with ourselves. And through that process, to access the liberated expression that's ready to come through. There's a lot here. Resistance is big. It's so normal that it's overlooked a lot. It's so normal that we live in it without realizing it. And yet there is a way to kind of step to the side, turn towards it, and access this embodied acceptance energy that we're going to talk about now. So take a breath here. Notice if any of your own resistance is being kicked up, any ahas, any shoulding or shaming, whatever it might be. And let's talk about, instead of coming at resistance with more resistance energy and thinking we need, oh no, shoot, I need to change my thoughts, I want this to be different, blah, 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 blah. Instead of that, just take a breath and allow yourself to soften and to feel what it might be like to say, oh, there's resistance here. Oh, high resistance. What are you here to show me? What's happening underneath this? I go through a process very similar to this, but with a slightly different focus in Awaken Your Flow. And I absolutely highly recommend going through that program. It is still free. You can listen to it like a podcast. You can watch the videos. But I go through kind of the slowing down process and getting into the body and turning towards ourselves in a much deeper way than I can do on one podcast. So again, breathing in and oh, There's resistance here. Okay, high resistance. What's happening in me? Where is this coming from? Where is this resistant energy coming from? Sometimes it's coming from emotion that hasn't been expressed, like I mentioned. So for me today, that was really feeling like, oh, wow, there's anger right underneath the surface that I have not given space yet. And as I moved with that anger and just spoke out loud, I love to do this process while I'm on my morning walks. And as I moved with the anger and just said out loud, like, I'm angry about this, almost as if I was talking to somebody, and just letting the energy come out of my mouth and move up and through my throat liberates so much. And then I was like, oh yeah, underneath this is just tremendous fear. Sometimes also what's fueling resistance is a sense of wanting things to be different so that you feel different about yourself. This idea that if this was different, I would feel blank, more secure, loved, free, seen, known, heard, acknowledged, well paid. There can be thousands of responses to this. So notice kind of what might be there if you find yourself in resistance now or any resistant thoughts. And just as the observer, breathing in, just acknowledging whatever arises. So for me, as I walked with my fear this morning, I was just like, yeah, it's really understandable to be afraid of these things. It's really understandable to want them to be different. And also, I know that by wanting them to be different, it's taking me away from being able to engage with my life fully today. It's taking me away from being able to feel my energy here present in my body. And notice already that as we've begun to just acknowledge what's happening with the resistance, with the thoughts first, what's coming underneath them, with the energies that might be there in terms of need, desire, pain. Notice how the energy is just like already moved out of the head and back down into the body and feels like it's grounding itself. Like there is access to these parts of you again, where when we're just operating in mental resistance, it is like nothing moves beyond or beneath the throat. We don't even have access to these other things until we slow down and soften and turn towards. So, by acknowledging, oh yeah, I can really understand this fear, this anger, this need, by affirming it, by witnessing it fully, by not ostracizing it or shaming it, like you shouldn't feel this way, that energy just creates more resistance by really, wow, this is a really understandable sensation in this circumstance. This is a really understandable emotion or feeling, need or desire in this circumstance or in the circumstance of your life. And I have the option. Do I want to stay in resistance around this? Or do I want to come current with my energy today? And there is no right or wrong answer here. And when I say to myself, Yeah, that's so understandable. And I know that it actually doesn't feel very good for me to stay here, but I do want to honor this place and see what it needs. If anything more, oftentimes it just needs to be known and acknowledged and spoken to and witnessed. But if it needs something else, what does it need in order for me to really step into the beauty of this day and what is current? What does it need for me to be able to connect with what is present in my life in a non-resistant way? And this is where the part of embodied acceptance that I've talked about before, where you may need to allow yourself in this moment, in the what do I need, to grieve that things are not different yet, or to grieve the way that things have been, to grieve that the way that you want them to be has not come to fruition yet. I really find that not rushing this part is essential. That allowing yourself to really be with this part of the process is the portal to the liberated expression and the liberated energy that comes on the other side. I have spent days in this part before of just grieving what isn't, what I so desired to be. I'm grieving that it hasn't happened yet. I know in my journey there's a piece of me that when I kind of connect with all my parts and pieces around my hopes and dreams and certain things, there's a piece of me that always holds the space of the grief that it hasn't happened yet. I've worked with people that are working through pregnancy or the desire to be pregnant, and so focused on moving forward and staying optimistic that they can't actually come current with the process that they're in, because there's actually a space being asked for to be able to grieve that it just hasn't happened yet. And sometimes we become afraid that if we grieve this or sit with that or actually allow these deep emotions to move here, we become fearful that we're interfering with what we want to come, with what we want to be, with what we want to happen. Like if I take my focus off of this, and if I feel these things, I know I have done this before. This is a huge part of my early journey around my mom's death. Like if I actually sit in the grief, I'm not promoting her life. Or if I actually allow myself to be in the grief that this has not happened yet, and to move with that, to allow myself to really move in space and time and emotion and energy with this, then I'm taking my focus off it, and therefore it won't happen. And oftentimes that's actually the reverse. Not always. And we don't have control over that. But what the reverse is that when we give space to this, we release resistance. We allow the energy to find a new flow without resistance. It doesn't have to work so hard. The things in our life are able to connect and find movement again, instead of feel like we are pushing against something and it is pushing against us. This is essential. This is reverent grief and pain work. This is sacred. Maybe today the first step is just being able to name, I am angry, or I am still angry. Even though I wanted to be beyond this anger, there is still anger here. Maybe it is just saying, there is grief here. For all the years, the ways, the moments I wanted this to be different. I hoped it would be different. I just use the pregnancy as an example. This happens in all of our lives, in all of our own ways. And it is something that we skip over so much, usually out of fear of what being with it will mean. If we take our eyes off of the prize for a moment and actually sit with the feelings and the processes and the energy of what is here and stirring with us. So I really don't want you to rush around this part. I don't want you to feel like you have to get to the acceptance already. The richness of the acceptance is created by the space that we give this moment. And it will also encourage you that at the beginning, it can feel long and slow, needing to stay in this kind of place of just being with what was underneath all of that resistance. And over time, it becomes a natural process. Things find more fluidity more quickly. And so by just honoring whatever the timing of what's underneath the resistance for you is, by honoring and saying, wow, this is what's here and I'm going to give it space, you're laying the land for tremendous mastery over the time of your lifetime to be able to work with these nuanced moments over and over and over again, and to learn how to be with them and learn how to offer that space to others as well. That is incredibly powerful, and that will create the ability for more fluidity in your life, a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. It will create the ability to open to more of yourself a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. It is an act of saying yes to your fullness. So it may last a while. And I also want to say that you will know when this kind of phase of this process is concluding. You will feel the shift in your body. You will feel the shift in your energy. You will feel your focus start to open up to be a little bit more macro again. You will feel yourself be able to breathe more deeply. You'll feel a new energy begin to stir again in the place of all the energy that was not able to move before. Now that it's been able to move, there's new flow that's awakening. There's a new spring of life that can move through. And it's gentle at the first. Sometimes, well, I've had moments where it just is like literally walking down the street just laughing because it's so incredible. So it can be big or it can be small. But what you'll notice is that naturally, this new energy, this energy of acceptance, is so present that it will just pull you to be with life as it is. It will pull you, if you're outside on a walk, it always pulls me to look at the trees and the flowers. It will pull me to sounds that I wasn't listening to before that were present. It will offer me a new perspective of my day and what's before me, and new ways to engage. Embodied acceptance is really about reclaiming our ability to engage with what is, and also in the process of living in what is, find and connect to the beauty that is laying the groundwork for what is coming. And the reason I call this embodied acceptance and not just like acceptance is because I think a lot of the times we can just say, you just need to accept this and move on. To me, that's just more resistance. That's still coming from your mind. It's still coming from the headspace. It's still just that same energy that resistance creates, like putting that against resistance. Embodied is really bringing the whole process in and through the body, letting our energy come back down. And then from the bottom up, and I always think of the bottom as like our pelvic region. You can even think of it as your feet, like so much emptying out and down, and then new energy lifting up through us again when it's clear and when there's space and readiness. When the honoring of what needed to move out and down has happened, the space for what wants to come up and through, what wants to move us, the new frequency of connection that we have with everything in us and around us pops up. Maybe you're going through this process seated in your car, in your office, on public transit. And as this new energy comes up, you're just drawn to look at where you are and your life with a sense of awe. Like, wow, okay, things are moving, things are different. I have walked through so much. I am not in the same place as before. We are not in the same place as before. Sometimes it might just be to like look at the people around you and be just in a chuckled moment of, this is a ridiculous, human, crazy, wild experience, and here we are. Maybe you even have the energy to skip. Maybe you have the call to music. Maybe you just need to take a shower and change your clothes. Like, the energy of stepping into embodied acceptance is, okay, I don't have to love all of these things. I don't have to, like, this comes up in grief a lot for me. Like, I don't really understand still what the mental idea of acceptance towards grief is. Like, it does not click with me. It is so hard to accept that a person that you love will not be here for the rest of your life. But I can be in the process constantly of embodied acceptance, meaning I can be living in that acceptance of honoring that this person is not here, giving space to the grief that wants to move through, giving space to the grief that things aren't different, that they weren't different, and therefore being popped out the other side of the embodied acceptance portal and here I am living in this reality. I don't love that my mom isn't here with me or that she wasn't at my sister's wedding. Like, I don't know how to even wrap my mind around that sometimes. And yet I can be in full engagement with this life. So much of simply what's needed for our own healing and for collective healing is the ability to engage in our lives. This is a process of mastery. It maybe sounds like, I don't know what it might sound like to you, actually. Maybe it sounds simple, maybe it doesn't. But the medicine that is alive here is exponentially powerful. When we are fully able to engage in our present moment, it means we are able to engage ourselves as we are in our imperfect beauty, to work with ourselves, to move ourselves through moments of resistance, like sitting down to do the thing you didn't want to do or talking to the person you didn't want to talk about. It gives us access to our fullness in the sense that it opens us vulnerably and also with composure. I could go on and on, but I feel so deeply about the power of allowing ourselves to come into present engagement with life and the gift that going through this process of embodied acceptance and beginning to detect and move with resistance in a new way instead of just a mental high pass over, like, oh, hey, yeah, no, I'm just going to choose something else, blah, blah, blah. But really like this, it's almost like this, it is a death and rebirth cycle. Like just with it, maybe it happens within an hour, maybe it happens within a few days, but the aliveness that comes through is so exponentially powerful. This is something that I love to lead. I would say like processes like this come up in my one-on-one spaces with clients every session. Like it doesn't necessarily look like this, and it's not always about resistance. And yet this is the same energy of this death and rebirth cycle that as we work with what's present and what's here, we are invited into. And I am just in awe, and I love to see my clients just bathing in this, bathing in the power, the potential, the vibrancy, the aliveness, the clarity, bathing in the shift that is so profound that it can set up the way you move through life differently. And through that, your life can change. We really can't come up alongside change and move with it and approach it from an embodied place if we don't have tools and willingness like this. This is change that is powered from deep within, that is coming from this flow of life within us, from allowing the constriction, the squeezing hand on our pipes to loosen, and allowing the power of that flow to come through and then to lead us and to guide us. Instead of just using combative, resistant energy that just keeps us feeling stuck. I could go on, and I also want to let you be in your process, but I would love to hear from you. What's coming up? Where do you notice resistance in your life? Where do you notice the places that you create it? Where do you feel this kind of combative energy that you're putting out or somebody else is putting out? Where do you feel this constricted sense, this inability for your inner waters, your water of life to really flow through you, where your fountain is being constricted? And I would love to know your experience if you walk through this practice of embodied acceptance. Like, what does it feel like for you? What happens and comes up? What do you see and feel differently? And if it takes you 10 days, deep respect. Let me know what happens. This is a powerful one. And I look forward to witnessing you on your journey. If you're ready for one-on-one support, I have some very specific one-on-one times that I'm working with people this month in one-offs, where you can apply to work with me for 4 months minimum. Those journeys are so incredible and powerful. And yeah, I would love to meet you. I will be back with you soon. May this all sink in and integrate, and I encourage you to let it have space to do so. Thanks for being here. Thank you so much for listening to The Fountain. Please take a moment to rate and review the show and to send it along to a friend that comes to heart or mind. I'd also love to hear what came up for you and your experience listening to the most recent episodes. So reach out via your podcast app or send me an email. And if you'd like to book your first session or explore working together more, find me at ellieflow.com.